Hello, good evening, and welcome back. Macron EU Brexit deal decision at end of the week. So how are you all doing? Looking forward to this on Halloween, just over 3 weeks' time. The EU will decide at the end of next week whether a Brexit deal is going to be possible, French President Emmanuel Macron has told Boris Johnson. And of course there are two ways that Boris Johnson might be hoping this will play out. The first is that, hey, we are actually going to get that deal as hoped, and then we can go ahead with leaving at the end of October with the deal that he proposed, which is fine, or that it'll be blocked and he'll try and go ahead with a no deal regardless, which would of course go against the law that has been passed, but at which point he could then say, well, how about an election then? And then we can campaign on that, at which point he'd have to form some sort of agreement with the Brexit party most likely, and therefore if you're wanting to get Brexit passed, you'd have to vote for whichever party, Conservatives or the Brexit party, depending on where you're living. But we'll burn that bridge when we get to it, because I don't see this going on until the end of January. Definitely not without another election. He said talks should proceed swiftly in coming days to see if anything can be agreed that respects EU principles. No, they don't respect EU principles. They were created with the end goal of a collective, which goes against the British character anyway. So, no, let's not. Mr Johnson, who set out his proposals last week, says the EU should not be lured into thinking there will be a delay to Brexit on 31st of October. Good man. However, a law requires him to request one if no deal is agreed by 19th of October. I don't see him necessarily abiding by that. I think he'll try and get around it any way he can. And maybe his plan, as I say, is to get his deal shot down in order to go ahead with a no deal Brexit, as that's, as far as I'm concerned, essentially what people voted for. It was an in-out referendum, as David Cameron so aptly put it. I mean, you're saying about, what about these deals and customs unions and all that, then that doesn't sound like it's out, as far as I'm concerned. But we will see how the cookie crumbles. As part of a weekend talking to EU leaders, the UK Prime Minister told Mr Macron over the phone that he believes a deal can be achieved, but the EU must match compromises made by the UK. This seems to be going against the art of the deal, as Trump said in his book, which wasn't written by him though. However, there is a top FBI negotiator from back in the day, as in for hostage situations, who could get everything that he wanted. And I think this was mentioned on The Art of Improvement or The Improvement Pill, one of the two YouTube channels. And they said basically what you do is you go in for everything you want, and whenever somebody says they can't do it, is you essentially say, firstly, that you understand where they're coming from, and it'd be good if they could give in a bit. Also that, as you understand where they're coming from, there's nothing that you can do. You're in a really bad situation, and be good of them to help out and be much more, I suppose, moral of them to do so, as you really can't budge because it's beyond you and it doesn't quite work for you. It seems, rather annoyingly, to be based on emotion instead of fact. It's feelings over facts as far as this goes, because people are emotional creatures, and therefore that's how he uses negotiations. Instead of doing something logical like the art of the deal, which is to request more than you think you're going to get, and then you work your way back so it seems like you've compromised when you actually haven't. So maybe Johnson is going in for that way this time. An Lacy official said the President told Mr Johnson that the negotiations would continue swiftly, with Michael Barnier's team in coming days, in order to evaluate at the end of the week whether a deal is possible that respect European Union principles. Yeah, well, no. Let's read on and on and on and on and on. The number 10 source called the Legislation Surrender Act, the Benville, and said its authors were undermining negotiations, and that is what sparked people to bring up Joe Cox and to say, you can't talk about us in such an honest way. What are the people going to do? Then they're going to realise that we're not respecting what they voted us in for, and now we're going to be treated as the traitors and criminals that we are, and therefore people are going to feel willing to use force against us as we feel so willing to use force against them, and that violates the agreement that we've already violated between the Parliament and the people. But they weren't quite so honest when they said it. To which, of course, Johnson said, humbug. If EU leaders are betting that it will prevent no deal, that would be a historic misunderstanding, they said. Good. And their analyst, who cares? So, border plans, because let's go on to the Good Friday agreements, which this doesn't jeopardise in the slightest, but they're just trying to pull out all the stops to try and find something, even if it isn't of any concrete stature. So under Johnson's proposals, which equals a broad landing zone for a new deal with the EU, Northern Ireland would leave the EU's customs union alongside the rest of the UK at the start of 2021. Northern Ireland would continue to apply EU legislation relating to agricultural and other products if the Northern Ireland Assembly approves, and they probably won't. And as I said before, if they're concerned about there being a hard border there, then the IRA will go to Brussels. Simple. This arrangement could, in theory, continue indefinitely, but the consent of Northern Ireland's politicians would have to be sought every 4 years. Similar to, of course, what the Lib Dems are going to try and do to get us back in the EU. That ain't going to happen. People seem to like the status quo. They like the predictability of it. So when something happens, even if it is a big upset, well, then we wish to maintain with that new way of going. And the same in your own life. If you want some life advice there, as my best friend says, that things tend to be in a tolerable hell. This leads on from what Tony Robbins says, is that people should themselves all over, that you're not going to do what you think you should do until your should becomes a must. There are a load of things that you think you should do, but you're not going to do them until you must do them, and it's only at that point that something happens. In the meantime, as bad as things might be, it's just going to be what he calls a tolerable hell, that is terrible, but it's not so bad that you're going to change it. It's where people complain and they don't actually act. Similar with the dog on the nail. So someone walking past a porch and sees a dog whining there, and he asks their owner, say, hey, why is your dog whining? He said, oh, he's on a nail. So, well, doesn't that hurt? So, well, yes, of course it does. I said, well, why doesn't the dog move off then? To which the guy say, well, it doesn't hurt that much. And it's the same in life. But going on, customs checks on goods traded between the UK and EU would be decentralised, perfect, with the paperwork submitted electronically and only a very small number of physical checks. Love the decentralisation, let's continue it more down to counties, why not? These checks should take place away from the border itself, at business premises, or at other points in the supply chain. As far as decentralised, you could even just start off with a north and south divide. But I'm all for the states anyway. On the Andrew Marr show, let's just end with their false proselytising. Shadow Attorney General Shami Chakrabarti said the Prime Minister speaks with forked tongue on the possibility of asking for an extension, adding he seems to think he is above the law. No, he's trying to follow what the good people of Great Britain and Northern Ireland asked for back on June 24th, 2016, saying that we would leave the EU with the understanding they would be within 2 years of that, seeing as it would take 2 years after triggering Article 50. So it would be by the end of 2018, and of course it wasn't. We've had so much time of extensions, it's almost been at the same time again, and that's what they're going for. They're hoping then, well, we can push it to June next year, that'll be double the time, and then keep going, and we'll stay in indefinitely, which of course we're not going to. Other countries will leave probably when the Eurozone collapses anyway, at which point the European Union will just crumble. Nothing lasts forever. Rome deteriorated as well, and even with tactics like Tony Blair employed of trying to import people and bribe them because they're easier to bribe because they have less staff. If you import them from the third world, then you can use them as reliable voters. But that, as an idea, is failing, considering that integration isn't happening, and now it's becoming more and more observed and allowed to be spoken about, of how integration and assimilation isn't happening, and now we're getting particular segregation in various cities and increasing crime accordingly, because people don't assimilate. Whereas you have people from decades prior, of course, who do move into England, and then they think of themselves as English or British, and therefore they abide by the law of the land and raise their children accordingly. But when you get people who aren't doing that, that's when the problems happen, and you get a revolt like this. And I think that Brexit is still just the safety valve to stop something, to create more of a precedent latterly, which will be more vitriolic. So she insisted there were no loopholes in the legislation, adding that the conditions under which the PM must ask for another Brexit delay were explicit and specific. But of course, he's got his own legal team as well, so we'll try and find a way around it. It's like, yeah, you've got to send a letter. Yeah, but you can send two. But anyway, that's it for me for now. Do let me know what you guys think down below. Do you think we will leave on Halloween? I'm pretty sure we will. Do you think we will leave with a deal? Do you think it's better if we don't? Do you think we'll leave with a deal, as tenuous as it might be, in order to then curtail it as soon as possible so that we are actually out, form agreements with countries individually, and just wait for the EU to collapse? And hey, British Empire might come back, but seeing as that was a net cost for Britain, I don't see that happening again anytime soon. So, as I say, let me know what you guys think down below. Thank you so much for watching, liking, sharing, commenting, subscribing, all that good stuff. Thank you so much, and have a good one.